Hey everybody, so you may have noticed that I didn't get a video out last week. Sorry. It's that time of the year again, and usually the week before Samhain I'm slammed with rituals, circles, and gatherings, and on top of, my normal 9 to 5, the video just wasn't gonna happen. But also I went to Salem, Massachusetts over the weekend and met some great friends up there, saw snow for the first time, and even had a chance to meet up with some of you people out there in the YouTube land, Pink Tourmaline Witch, Justin, Georgiana, Illy. Shout out to all of you. It was a shit ton of fun and an experience I will never forget. So better late than never. Here's my video on Samhain, so here we go. What's up everybody, blessed be. My name's Mannun and you are watching Witch in the Working, where we will be discussing all things witchy in and around, throughout and about, above, below, and beyond. This year's been chugging right along. I mean, let's face it, it's 2020, hasn't exactly been chock full of total awesomeness, but it has definitely been a year of patience and inner shadow work contemplation. We're slowly but surely winding our way through the darker half of the year, and now we've come to Samhain. So this episode we'll be talking all about one of the more popular and loved sabbats of the year. It's the darker side of the wheel, dealing with life, death, and rebirth, so let's get into it and roll the intro. Welcome back everybody. Samhain is one of the greater sabbats and takes place on October 31st. This sabbat marks the end of the third and final harvest before winter will start to set in and take over. It's also a time in celebration to reflect on reincarnation, and especially a great time to commune with otherworldly beings and our passed on loved ones. The name Samhain quite possibly comes from one of the two ancient sources, that being one from the Aryan god of death, Samana, or two from the Irish Gaelic word Samhain, which translates to the summer's end. For the Celts, it was actually Samhain that marked the end of the old year and beginning of the new, instead of Yule, which many of the pagans believed and celebrated. The Celts felt Samhain was the new year because the sun is at its lowest point on the horizon as measured by the ancient standing stones of Britain and Ireland. It's believed by most witchy pagans today that during Samhain the god passes away and the Crone Goddess begins to mourn him in his death. In the process of him dying, he stands between the veils of life and death, which are at their thinnest on this evening, and holds them open. Because he's holding the veils between the world of the dead and the world of the living apart, it's very easy on this night for the dead to cross over into the living, and vice versa for the living to cross over into the land of the dead. Many times the Crone Goddess is depicted during this time as the old hag whom is menacingly stirring her cauldron, with the cauldron taking on the symbolic role of the cauldron of death, life, and rebirth, and all souls go to this cauldron and return from it through reincarnation. One of the most popular pagan stories involving this cauldron and goddess combination is the Cauldron of Caridwin, that portrays this exciting little story. According to the late medieval tale of Taliesin, included in some modern editions of the Mabinogion, Caridwin's son, Morfran, also called Afagdu, was hideously ugly, particularly compared with his beautiful sister, Creary. So Caridwin sought to make him wise in compensation. She made a potion in her magical cauldron to grant the gift of wisdom and poetic inspiration, also called Awen. The mixture had to be boiled for a year and a day. She set Morda, a blind man, to tend the fire beneath the cauldron, while Guillaume Bach, a young boy, stirred the concoction. The first 3 drops of liquid from this potion gave wisdom. The rest was a fatal poison. 3 hot drops spilled onto Guillaume's thumb as he stirred, burning him. He instinctively put his thumb in his mouth and gained the wisdom and knowledge Caridwin had intended for her son. Realizing that Caridwin would be angry, Guillaume fled, and of course Caridwin gave chase after him. Using the powers of the potion, he turned himself into a hare. She became a greyhound. He became a fish and jumped into a river. She transformed into an otter. He turned into a bird. She became a hawk. Finally, he turned into a single grain of corn. She then became a hen, and being a goddess or enchantress, depending on the version of the tale, she found and ate him without trouble at all. But because of the potion, he was not destroyed. When Caridwin became pregnant, she knew it was Gwion and resolved to kill the child when he was born. However, when he was born, he was so beautiful that she couldn't do it. She threw him in the ocean instead, sewing him inside of a leather skin bag. The child did not die, but was rescued on a Welsh shore near Aberdafi, according to most versions of the tale, by a prince named Elfyn ap Gwydno. The reborn infant grew to become the legendary bard Taliesin. See in my description below a song from my band Witch's Mark called Taliesin that is all about this story. From Samhain, we also get the popularized holiday we all know and love known as Halloween. Centuries ago, the church tried to stamp out this sacred holiday by proclaiming it one of their own holidays around or on a pagan holiday in order to try and cover up the pagan celebration and in turn provide influence of their own. This was a common practice by the early church and involved more sabbats and other pagan holidays than just Samhain. For instance, the spring equinox became Easter Sunday and the winter solstice became Christmas. The church figured if we can't get them to change their beliefs, then maybe we can force our beliefs on them by altering their sacred meeting grounds to churches and then by placing a Christianized holiday on top of the pagan holiday in hopes of gradually causing the pagan population to slowly but surely shift to the Christian beliefs. So this being said, the day after Samhain became Michaelmas. This didn't work out so well, so later it became All Saints' Day or All Hallows' Eve. Ultimately, the church had to diabolize Samhain by painting a picture of a night of evil spirits and demons that would harass and haunt people throughout the evening, creating fear, anxiety, and negativity for the pagan folk. This night of demons, imps, hellhounds, and creatures of the darker worlds was only brought to a halt and cured by the rising sun of All Saints' Day and also by the ringing of the local church bells that would send the demons and negative entities running, banished back to the darkness from which they came. Samhain is not and never was considered a night of evil spirits, ghouls, and goblins as the pagans perceive it anyways. Samhain is a time to reflect and experience the oneness of the spirit world and the relation to the world of the living. Again, at this time it is believed that the horn god is ready to pass on from the living world into the land of the dead. Because of this, the veils between the worlds of the living and the dead are at their thinnest, and the living and the dead both can pass easily back and forth between the two on this night. This makes communication between the living and the dead superb on this Sabbath. Many witches will utilize multiple scrying tools to attempt this conversation with passed on loved ones in hopes to connect once again between the worlds. Some of our pagan family and friends will put together what's called a dumb supper, in which a table is set and placed in a particular area, and the favorite foods and drink of a passed on loved one is set on the table as an invitation to come to the world of the living and eat, drink, and be merry with the living once again, even if it's just for one evening. Later, this food is sacrificed to the land and her inhabitants as an offering. Samhain is also a great realization that death is only the beginning. The Sabbath lets all of us who believe in paganism know that death is not the end and reinstates the understanding that when we pass into the land of the dead, as we all do as death is a part of life, we will be back reincarnated to continue forth with our lessons and collection of experiences throughout our many lifetimes. In order for us to progress and experience the many things we need to experience and accomplish, it takes many lifetimes. They cannot all be done in one lifetime. We all will ultimately, before reaching an addict state of being, will experience, for instance, what it's like to be a man and a woman, different races of people, different caste systems, to kill and be killed, to love on many levels, to have children, to be loved, etc., etc. Although Samhain is not an evil Sabbath, evil and agitated spirits do exist in the world. Our pagan ancestors would carve gourds and pumpkins with faces on them, and they would place these in windows with the candlelight inside them. Sometimes they would just use candles in the windows alone, and this was utilized, in fact, to help guide the earthbound spirits through the wandering night. This is most likely where we got the tradition of carving jack-o'-lanterns at Halloween. Even to this day in Ireland, it's traditional on Halloween to place a candle in the window and place a plate of food for visiting spirits. This custom of leaving out food is where we most likely developed the custom of trick-or-treat. Yes, there is a large focus on death at this time of the year, and especially pertaining to this particular Sabbath. However, this doesn't mean that everything has to be solemn, dark, and dreary. Many pagan covens I know that ritualize for this Sabbath incorporate a Lord of Misrule, so to speak. This is a person who is given the sole purpose in the ritual to keep spirits up and create lighthearted giggles and little pranks throughout the evening to help people's not be so intense in emotion, shall we say. I mean, again, on this night we are remembering and communing with people we have not yet seen for maybe many years and don't get to encounter much anymore except for in our minds, so this Sabbath can get pretty intense and emotional. It's important to maintain a balance in emotions, so the part of the Lord of Misrule or the Coven Jester for this particular evening is a most important role and taken very seriously. It's his or her job to sense and know when to swoop in and cheer someone up for their melancholy state of being, as to balance them out so they don't implode in a depression for the rest of the evening. In Rome during this holiday, everything was supposedly turned upside down. Kings and servants switched places, for instance. This was done in honor of the apple goddess Pomona. Fires were lit in her honor and petitions were given in hopes she would bless the petitioners. The following day, a celebration was carried out for the goddess of wealth and luck called Fortuna. Together, these two goddesses were believed to be able to go into the land of the dead and return with the spirits of loved ones so that communion with the living and the dead could commence. In Mexico, there's quite a popular holiday that is their Samhain equivalent called El Dia De Muerte, Day of the Dead. During this celebration, the living honor their passed on dead and eat, drink, and celebrate with them. It's in the Mexican culture the belief that this is the one day that Death himself takes a one-day break from his job. Many families will go to graveyards and sit with their loved ones at their tombstones and have a picnic and commune with them. Also, it's a time when people dress up as Death and parade in the streets to honor this being of change and transition. I spoke earlier about the pumpkin, and I think this autumnal gourd deserves a little more attention for this Sabbath and season. So the pumpkin has been utilized during Samhain for thousands of years, back especially in Ireland, where these gourds were carved into what we call now jack-o'-lanterns. Faces were carved into these gourds, especially during travel, as it was believed that carrying these lanterns that they would frighten away evil spirits attempting to come in contact with the journeyers, especially at night. Many times, actually, turnips were used by the Irish, but this is where the idea progressed into pumpkins and jack-o'-lanterns. It's also not just a random coincidence that the head is being used as the focus of carving these jack-o'-lanterns. It was believed by the ancient Celts that the head was the focal point of the center of learning, but also the seat of the immortal soul. This being said, the heads of Celtic war victims were often taken and placed on spikes to protect the nearby villages from evil spirits. Most likely it was used as an intimidation factor as well against any invaders moving forward. One most famous head was that of the Celtic god Bran the Blessed, whose head was placed on high where the famous Tower of London now stands and was faced towards the English Channel from where the greatest threats came from. Masks are another common theme we see during Samhain and on Halloween night. During trick-or-treating, all the adults, kids, and people of all ages running around adorned in masks and costumes, imitating just for one evening whatever their desires, and for just one evening can do this without the fear of strange looks or getting locked up in a special facility somewhere. Wearing masks and costumes is a very, very old practice. In fact, it goes back further in human history than scholars can actually pinpoint. One of the earliest recordings of ritualistic use of costume and mask dates back to the Paleolithic period to a cave painting in southern France. Most all-body adornment was originally utilized in ritual. Piercings, paintings, scarring, tattooing, you name it. It has its original roots and ritualistic roots before it became a cosmetic thing. Costumes and masks used in ancient times were to incorporate sympathetic magic into their ritual. If they, for instance, were doing a ritual to ensure a successful hunt, then the priest of the clan would dress in a costume and mask of the prey that they were hunting and act like the prey, and in turn, the hunters of the tribe would then act out the hunt and dance and raise energy to a successful hunt. Salon feasting is yet another subject to cover that is an important feature during this Sabbath. In many cultures, wild hunts took place to gather food for the upcoming winter months, lurking just around the corner. Large hunting parties would head out to bring enough meat home to sustain the village for the cold death months to come. For the tribes and cultures of peoples who were herders, a lot of the herd would be slaughtered, and again the meat utilized to sustain the village through the dark months of the hardship to come. Even agricultural harvest of fields in a lot of cultures was considered taboo to harvest anything after Samhain, with the penalty being extreme bad luck for the coming year or invoking the wrath of demons, spirits, and demigods to bring havoc and darkness and even death upon you. And finally, we come to my last subject concerning Samhain, and this is the inclusions of our Fae folk friends once again. As with many of the summer and springtime sabbats, the Fae folk affect this fall sabbat heavily too. In ancient times, it was thought that the more aggressive of the fairy cultures were prominent at this time, and many peoples would use this time to protect themselves from the Fae. The pagan Scots would pour milk out onto a rock called Liach na Grugaik, translated to milk to the hairy ones. Many would give libation to the Fae on this night as to not wake up in the morning and to dead or dying livestock, for instance. It was also frowned upon sometimes to go out too late at night as to risk being kidnapped by the Fae, only to be returned years later after everyone else had grown old or died that you knew and loved. So again, on Samhain night, since the veils between the living and the dead are at their thinnest point, this is a time when communication between the living and the dead is very easy to accomplish. There are many ways to achieve this ritually, with a coven, solitaire, with tools, without tools, etc., etc. Divination is key in this process. Many pagans on this night will attempt to communicate with passed on relatives through the many tools of divination, whether using tarot cards, pendulums, scrying in its many forms. See my video on magic mirrors linked above and below in the description. The infamous and most popular Ouija board, especially for spirit communication, palmistry runes, etc., etc. Divination on this night will be most successful. In fact, on this night, if you go to sleep thinking of the person that you want to communicate with, there is a really, really good chance he or she will come to you in your dreams and pay a visit. Give it a shot. The effects of Samhain actually last up until 15 degrees Scorpio, which is November 7th this year. So you still have some time left. Let us all know in the comments below if you're successful or not. Well, that's going to wrap it up with this episode of Witch in the Working. Did you celebrate Samhain this year? If so, let us all know in the comments below what you did and how you did it. Did you attempt to speak with the dead? Let us all know. Please hit that subscribe button and ring that little bell to be reminded of the future episodes to come. I love you guys and gals. Until next time, blessed be and love you.